Book 1, Chapter 9, An Ancient Prophecy. Vigilant knights were scattered across the turrets and battlements with strung bows. From the distance Windsor called out, "It's I, Windsor." They approached cautiously, Windsor holding up his orb that they might see his face. With a fiery dart, the sharp-shooting warrior lit the firebox that stood beside the riders. These griddle boxes were erected on large rock pillars fueled with oil. The sudden combustion startled Elk, thinking for a moment that he had been shot. Windsor's white beard and long hair were sure signs of the prophet himself. The squire opened the large iron-clad doors. They rode through the gate, stopped in front of the castle doors, and quickly dismounted. Clutching the hilt of the sword in his right hand and the blade in his left, Cosby wavered as the sword sent a surge of power throughout him. He felt invigorated, swayed by the power greater than himself. His healthy ego swelled without any contributions of his own. It was a high. He didn't want to let it go. "Here, wrap it in this," Novatian said, handing Cosby his wet riding jacket. Cosby hesitated, then with one more stern word from Novatian, wrapped the sword in the jacket. As Nobby walked into the castle, his brown riding boots squeaked with each bouncy step he took. Since he couldn't stand still, the squeaking never stopped. Neither did the gushing impulses of omnipotence that soared through Cosby as he held onto the cursed sword. Inside his chambers, the king's face was flushed with sleepiness as he smoothed his hands over his pajamas. Rap, rap, rap was the noise on his chamber door. "Sire, which meeting room do you want to meet them in?" "Just put them in the rotunda," answered the king as he began to peel off his night clothes and put on more appropriate attire. Wearing ordinary clothes, the king hurriedly walked down the corridor of the castle and into the meeting room where Gilmanza, Windsor, Nobby, Novatian, Nimri, Cosby, and Elk stood waiting. "So, my friends, what brings you back here at this hour?" asked the king. "And who is this you have with you?" "Well, this is Elk, one of the knights of the noble order of hospitable services," said Gilmanza. Novatian stood up and took the bundle from Cosby. The high Cosby was experiencing was immediately gone. He felt a sudden low come over him and an emptiness take up residence within. Unwrapping the sword of Darvan, Novatian laid it on the table quickly, hardly giving it time to put its spell on him. Nonetheless, he felt the sway on his soul. The round table was tiled with mosaic art, depicting a historically victorious battle. Its muted colors complemented the stone walls of the room. The large drapes were brick red with gold threads woven throughout, typical of royal taste. The uniquely stone-crafted torches on the walls gave a poor reflection of light to the room, allowing only dim visibility. Under the light, the rubies on the handle of the sword illuminated the room, casting diamond shapes onto the walls and the ceilings. The red drapes enhanced the red rubies, creating dancing shadows of a more brilliant color red than the rubies themselves. The riders stared in bewilderment at the beauty of the sword of power, its energy creating an atmosphere of wonder and mystique. It seized their attention and conjured up enticing sensations. For a moment, silence filled the room as they all stared at the sword of David. The ruby jewels of its hilt dazzled diamond-shaped images across the walls that danced a spellbinding dance, nearly hypnotizing them. Its very presence charmed the group, but King Chess seemed unimpressed by the sword. As though coming out of a trance, Nobby remembered the bloody and cruel history of the sword. He recognized its influence for what it was, deceptive and evil. Chafed by the cunning attraction of the crafted metal, he stood up indignant and pointed his staff at the cursed blade. Energy shot back, and there was conflict between the two forces. It was a powerful struggle between good and evil. As the forces continued for predominance, Nobby's feet leveled off the ground, and the power of the sword slammed him into the wall. The steel sword now lifted off the table, levitating in the air for a few seconds, then returned to its place. Nobby crashed to the floor, and as he hit the ground, a large picture fell on his head. Windsor picked up the picture. Your zeal is admirable, Nobby, but the sword cannot be defeated by zeal. Yeah, I know, Nobby said with some resignation. Then why'd you do it? It just seemed like a good idea at the time, crony, replied Nobby, straightening his crooked hat. So where did you find the sword? The king asked. This is our culprit, Windsor said, grabbing Elk by his wavy, unmanageable hair and lifting him out of his seat. King Chess turned to Elk. And where did you get the sword, son? Windsor let go of the lad's hair and returned to his seat. Tugging awkwardly on his ear, Elk explained how he came about finding the sword of power. I was walking down the path when something ran across the road and knocked me into the swamp. As I was trying to climb out, my hand was pierced by something sharp. I dug it out and found this sword. Did you realize what sort of sword this was? Asked the king. Not at first. However, later I began to realize that this was a unique sword. What road were you traveling down? Windsor asked. He leaned forward, eyeballing Elk. He had an inkling of an idea, but he had to hear Elk say it. Shilly-shally Ford, Elk answered, rubbing his hands across his freckled face. When Elk said shilly-shally Ford, Windsor, Norby, and Gilmanza became more attentive, leaning forward in their seats, each acknowledging their understanding of what Elk had said. Windsor ran his hand across his silver beard. Just as I suspected, he thought. Clearing his throat, Windsor confirmed. Shilly-shally Ford? Are you certain of this, Elk? Yes, why? Just want to make sure I understand you correctly. This was not the time to divulge the significance of this news, not to this young lad. Why didn't you bring the sword to me? Asked King Chess. I just couldn't let it go, Elk proclaimed. It made me feel so skilled, so powerful. His eyes grew wide, even without the sword in his hand. He spoke with enthusiasm as he rambled on and on about the sword. Now that it was out of his possession, he felt enervated and weak. The king interrupted the young knight. Well, I believe we need to put this sword in a locked place. We need to put Elk in a safe place too. He reached out his hand towards the sword, hesitated, and then boldly picked it up. Immediately the sword radiated with warmth. He felt its power burn within him. With the keys that hung from his garments, he unlocked the secret door built into the stone wall behind a picture on the wall and placed the sword in the secret chamber, locking the steel door. Elk's eyes grew wide with protest. Objecting, he leapt to his feet and snarled, This is my sword! I found it! It's mine! His voice rose as he continued, You can't have it! It's mine! Give it back! There was now rage in his eyes. Elk, sit down, King Chess said, in a calm but stern voice. Don't patronize me, Elk snarled. I want my sword. Discerning that this could easily get out of hand, King Chess walked out of the room and returned with a pair of handcuffs. Elk had become wild now and was trying to fight their attempts to restrain him. But his efforts to resist were futile. In a short time, they had him cuffed and gagged. The last thing they needed was him rambling on about the sword to everyone in the castle. It is not because you found the sword that you're going to the dungeon, the king told him. It is because it has gained entrance into your heart. It is for your own good. Two squires escorted him out of the room with Elk still putting up a fight. Put him in solitary confinement, the king ordered. They waited until he had left the room. Then Windsor said, So, shilly-shally Ford, huh? Well, what is so important about that? Asked Nimry. Well, there's an ancient prophecy that says the sword would be found at shilly-shally Ford. Windsor didn't tell him that it was a prediction that he had made. His authorship of it was irrelevant. He had proved himself a true prophet. Pulling a scroll from his brown writing satchel, He laid it on the table, opened it, and fumbled with it, scrolling this way and that, until he found the spot. A beam from the moon shone through the window, lighting the page, and he began to read. O land of Shaloheim that seeks to be redeemed, you sought for peace, but instead found a sword at the fork in the road of Shilly-Shally Ford. Now your way of peace has come to an end. With division among you, how will you defend? A kingdom divided cannot stand. There will be no more in this land. Down, down you will fall. The quest for power will fool you all. For the sword of Dorvan will create discord. You will cut your own throats with your own sword, unless there arises a circle of riders that will carry the sword to the immortal fighter. Rolling the scroll further, Windsor picked up the reading for another passage. Through Darvan's heart the sword must penetrate, and into the fires of Quaidar both must precipitate. The failure to fulfill the mission of redemption will result in an endless rule of evil without remission. Taking out another scroll, Windsor laid it on the table of the other and rolled through it. His eyes searched for the words. The prophet says, after years of its misplacement, the sword of Darvan is found. A battle rages unto the end. Cries echo across the land. War and famine and death stain the land. Lives are lost, blood is spilled, the soul is red. A circle is formed, but choose carefully this circle, lest the betrayer be among you. There rises a bearer of the sword, one who carries the weight of the burden of humanity. He faces the temptation of the power of sin. One immortal king, the last of all immortal kings, bears the burden of the sword. The immortal king rides across the land, a land home of the darkness, a land home to evil, a land home to Darvan. He rides bent on conquest, a task of great obstacles. Sweat rolls down his face as the temptation of the sword tempts his very soul. If he fails, evil will rule forever. There arises the betrayer of good. Oppression, cruelty, and evil are increasing, and will rule the land forever if the immortal king fails. All hope of redemption will forever be lost. But ahead, in the haze of the hills, I see the immortal rider bent on conquest, and I see an army following. Why were we not told about the prophecy of Shilly-Shally Ford? Cosby asked. Because when the prophecy was made, power-hungry people gathered at Shilly-Shally looking for the sword. They went on quest along the road to find it, so I became mum about the location of its finding. If Elk found the sword of Darvan at Shilly-Shally Ford, then the prophecies are being fulfilled as we speak. There's only one immortal king left, King Jophia Servanius Justus. This is the beginning of the fulfillment of the great war, said Navi. So in order for Darvan to be permanently defeated, Cosby asked, seeking clarity, his sword of power must be plunged into his heart by the immortal king, and he must be thrown into the fires of Quaidar with the sword through his heart. Yes, answered Windsor. Why can't one of the other immortals destroy him? Because they do not have the authority, Navi replied. Only a king has the authority to destroy him. Only this king. While there were at times many immortal kings over many lands, they gradually fell, losing their immortality. But it was meant that only this immortal king could defeat Darvan, because he was the one who placed the curse upon him, explained Windsor. He alone can put the end to Darvan and his evil kingdom. Questions arose among the riders, one asking one question and after another. Windsor ushered the riders to silence as he read from another passage of prophecy, a scroll offered by him. A bearer of the sword will arise, who will bear the burden of it, until it is placed in the hands of the immortal king. His origins are of ancient days, a people of long ago. He will carry the sword into the canvas of the earth, into dark portals, in cursed byways, himself bearing the curse of the sword that pierced him. So, there is someone who will arise and will carry the sword, asked Cosby. Yes, that is correct, answered Windsor. So what is all this about? Canvas of the earth and dark portals? Novatian inquired. It's a metaphor that describes the temptation of the sword upon mortal souls, answered Windsor, believing himself to have answered correctly. Nimry chimed in. So who is this circle of riders? Silence fell upon them. After a good while, Norby spoke. Well, it looks like we have our work cut out for us, cronies. We must gather the most noble of riders and ride to the land of Shikadesh, Windsor answered. According to the prophecy, now is the time. The prophet said we must choose carefully. Energized with the new information, the riders gathered around the table with their mugs filled with steaming coffee. Gilmanzi and Windsor puffed on their long, slender pipes as the riders discussed who should make up this circle to serve the immortal king. Numerous names were thrown around, most of whom Nimry and Cosby were unfamiliar with, and some of whom Novatian had only heard of. The decisions were easily made as the most skilled and loyal warriors were chosen. You will need to split up, said the king. Windsor, Novatian, and Nimry must go first to the west to the Shavi, to the earth dwellers, and get Vandorf. Then go west to the land of the giants and get Gilgor. Then is to the north to the Vikings for Zorgor. Gilmanza, Norby, and Cosby will go south to the Wadis to get Mungar. Then go east to the land of the Hills and get Osni. Then go into the valley of the Sorbs and get Baldar. You'll all meet up at the tomb of Murdorf. Then go to the land of Shikadesh and inform King Justice. The king continued as though the Shikadesh issue were merely an obstacle awaiting solution. But first, all of you will ride together south to get Skeena. May God be with us, he added as he ran his hands through his bushy hair. For these will be the circle of riders, the servants of the immortal king. King Chess concluded, standing and putting his hand on his round stone table chiseled with the images that celebrated victory. What about Shikadesh? Nimry asked. How are we going to get in? Our only option? Appeal to the graciousness of the immortal king. Windsor, you have some pull. Use it. A lump formed in Windsor's throat. He swallowed hard, hoping it would go away. For now it is still night. Sleep a few hours while you can, the king added. I will have the servants and squires prepare necessities for your journey. Anticipating riding out in a few hours, the riders tossed and turned. Unable to sleep, they finally decided to get up and prepare for the mission, sharpening blades, checking bowstrings, filling quivers, and packing smaller items that might be needed. They made sure everything was in order. Shortly after dawn, they dined with the king. The table was filled with juicy fruits and soups and breads and pastries and meats. The riders stuffed themselves, knowing that they might not get another meal that hearty for a good while. While they breakfasted, the servants prepared their beasts for riding and packed food, while the squires gathered arrows, extra bowstrings, and bows. After breakfast, the six carried their belongings to the mounts and secured their bags on the saddles. The dragons did not have saddles, of course. As Novatian was leaving the palace, Nadora appeared astride her dragon, Orpha, leading her stiletto Vala. Across Orpha's back were two bags, a mail jacket and a helmet. She had a quiver full of arrows strapped to her back and a sword at her side. Your horse's leg is some better, but the stable keeper thinks it best if he stays off of it a little while longer. Plus, the more flying beast we have, the better. You may ride Vala. Her natural protective armor will keep us safe. Well, thank you, Princess Nadora. You can leave off that princess stuff, she told him with a grin. As Novatian was securing his bags to Vala, the Doris spoke of her about her father's mission. We will gather the others in King Justice and be back soon. Her insinuations of riding with them raised objections from both Nimry and Cosby. What do you mean, we? You're not riding with us, Cosby cried. She is riding, Windsor said, mounting his dragon, ignoring the twinge of conscience he had about her riding on such a dangerous mission. What? A woman riding with us? It was Nimry's turn to object. It is far too dangerous for a woman to ride alone, Cosby added. We would likely encounter warriors of Quaidar. We haven't time to protect a woman. Who said I needed protecting? Oh, she is more precise with an arrow and swifter with a sword than you can imagine, Gilmanza said. Novatian was glad she was riding. Now the scenery would be greatly improved. As Windsor mounted Blaze, he settled the issue. She is riding with us. He felt no need to explain himself. Her skills would speak for themselves. Nadora raised her eyebrow in confidence and giggled girlishly. I just hope she can cook, Cosby muttered to Nimry, just loud enough for Nadora to hear. Oh, rubbish, I'll cook you over an open fire if you keep that up. And you would probably agree that I'm a better fighter than a cook. Joining the group, she held her head high and squared her shoulders as she slung her bow across her back, just to make certain of the sagacity of her riding with him. Then she smiled a gigantic smile. Leaning over Inca, Norby whispered to the king, I'll keep my close eye on her. With a grin wider than Norby's, the king whispered, No, you won't. You'll be going in the opposite direction. Curling his lip, Norby straightened his hat. The king walked up to Windsor and inconspicuously placed a key in his hand. It was the key to the safe that housed the Sword of Power. This is the only key, he told him. Windsor reluctantly took the key and tucked it inside his satchel. He aimed to forget that he held it. What about the sword? Nimry asked, aware that the king gave the key to Windsor. Aren't we taking the sword to King Justice? That sword is deplorable to him. We are merely to inform him of its whereabouts, and he will muster his army and ride here to get it. He declared that it would never set foot within his kingdom. Besides, it is safer here than out there where it would be a magnet for evil, explained Windsor. Just as they were about to ride, the wind blew, and Windsor held back his grey head. He raised his crooked staff in the air and declared with authority. At the river's edge they set in wait, like a fisher unaware of a fisherman's bait. Under the waters the trap will be set. One is in danger, all will get wet. They have made their plans, they have set the snare. The circle they will destroy if you forget that each is a pair. Your unity will be tested, only as a circle will you survive. If you all stick together at the river, they will be boiled alive. This is but one attack in a series of events, but if the circle is broken, all will suffer the consequence. Silence fell upon the riders as the alarming words of the prophecy shook their souls. The words left every heart searching and wondering what lay ahead of them as individuals, but most of all, as the circle. A circle upon which the kingdom of Sharlaheen depended. More importantly, a circle that could determine the fate of the world. Finally, they heeled their beast and rode through the iron-clad gates and down the dirt path that lay before the castle.